friends, welcome to this tutorial. So in this first part, you see colors on my Butter palette. So you don't have to match with any colors, and the list of colors is on the right side. Next, the first thing I'm going to do is wet the bird. I'm using a long quill size 2 brush. The next thing I'm grabbing with the long quill 2 is a combination of cobalt blue and indigo. You can also use or add a little bit of red. I'm focusing on like the areas, the darkest areas of those feathers over the face. So that's where I wanted to have this blue undertone, and also a little bit of blue like on the lower part of the bird. And just to have these undertones as well, because that's a shadowed area there. Now, I cleaned my brush before I grabbed the Mimi Des Long yellow. So it's a clean yellow. I also have on my palette a little bit of yellow ochre, so let's say that too, but it's not that important to have yellow ochre and rose sienna. You can just use one shade. And I also wiped my brush a little bit on a towel because I felt like I had too much paint water on my brush. What I'm doing right now is I'm quickly grabbing those colors on my brush. The brush is not like soaking wet. It's not a damp brush either. It's just that I want to have more like a half and half like ratio on my brush. Maybe sometimes I'll grab more like I'll try to have like a heavy cream. I'm choosing carefully where I apply the colors, and now at this point, because I've been painting for 4 or 5 minutes, I am making sure that I don't have too much water on my brush. The paper's still wet, and I'm overall moving around a lot more just to keep the areas wet longer. And looking for the midtones basically. And I still have a little bit, like I had a little bit of that Van Dyke brown, so I kept going, but I need to apply the darks too very soon. So where we have the blackish feathers around the eye. And now at this stage you feel okay, the paper is still wet. You can still you still see the shine over the paper, but it doesn't feel as wet anymore. So you have to adjust the ratio between water and paint too, because if you grab like a milk-like ratio, you will notice that you might easily create a bloom. The paint might spread too much. So actually right now, what I'm grabbing with the tip of my brush, it's kind of like between heavy cream to cream top like ratio. I switched to a kind of smaller brush. It's a round brush. It's not a quill brush. And I really wanted to add these feathers wet on wet. So this is like the last minute to add them wet on wet because the paper's like really like barely wet. This is a quick combination of the darks. So number one thing I teach is not to use black straight out of a tube. Instead, create your own shade of black. So whatever colors you want, that's fine. Just gently blend them on the palette and then do all the mixing on the paper so you can see the separation of colors. This is my rigger size 2. In the art supplies list, I recommend my own brush, but this is the brush that I started with. This is, I think, not Prado. I think it's Prado. It's called as Prado brush. So that's something I was using way before I had my own line of brushes. It's easier to lift when the area looks more transparent, if that makes sense. So sometimes I lift for like 10 minutes, sometimes I lift for 2 minutes. But you want to find the areas where you want to add more highlights in the way. Also, the lifted lines to recreate some of that hair will give you like a more delicate look to the feathers. So try not to overlift because that's easy to do too. The next step is to paint the eye. So I wet it first, and actually I start with undertones. What are those undertones in the eye, right? So I look at the highlight and I just focus on adding colors that I see inside the highlight. That was cobalt blue and quin red. And once I add this milky like ratio, it's even sometimes like, yeah, I'd say milk like ratio because it's a small area. After that now, like for example, this is more like a heavy cream like ratio. the idea is to actually have that paint on the tip of your brush so you don't carry that much. And I grabbed cream top-like ratio now with the tip of my brush, but the area, the beak is so small that the paper also dries faster. This was cobalt blue and some quinacridone red. You can just add quinacridone red too if you don't want to add any more blue to it, but we want to show some color. This is all cream top-like ratio now. It's a little bit of the cobalt blue and quin red. Now I want to add some of the darks with a smaller brush, round 0. So this is quinacridone red, indigo, Van Dyke brown. So as I am studying the beak at the same time, I'm thinking of all these darks, the darkest areas. And if you don't like some of the hard edges, you can quickly clean the brush, wipe it on a towel, and go right next to that line to soften it. And this way you can keep these areas with soft edges, just like right now. This is a clean brush, and I'm just softening it. So one side can have like a hard edge, but let's say the top or the bottom can have the soft edge, so that's when you want to use a damp brush. Here I'm pulling the paint a little bit, and I pull it down a bit too. Now for the eye, so generally whenever I paint the eye, the darkest parts, so a part of the highlight, so stay away from the highlight, I will start with like shades of brown, burnt sienna, Van Dyke brown, sometimes I'll add quinacridone red. I will add the color, this is water to milk like ratio, toward the darkest parts that I see. And you want to mix colors on the paper. This is a lighter shade now that you see because this is mostly burnt sienna and quinacridone red. And then when you zoom in onto the eye, you start seeing like, okay, that one area is darker. So once you add the midtones and you're happy with it, then you grab this little chunk of like indigo Van Dyke brown, thicker paint, so cream top. So this is the moment when I want to separate that wing from the rest of the body, and I have on my brush, well, this is my round 8, the softer brush, golden 2. So the colors, the burnt sienna, Van Dyke brown, some cobalt blue, quinacridone red, this is wet on dry, okay? I'm going to grab the other brush, my round 8 golden 1, which is a stiffer brush, just a clean brush to soften that stroke that I created underneath. This little trick will give you dimension. We'll create dimension this way because you will have a shadow underneath the wing, but you don't want to just have like a hard edge. That's why you're using the other brush to soften it. So a damp brush to soften it underneath that stroke. And then I'm adding way more water. You can see this is just a clean water, nothing else. We're going to do the same thing with the feathers over that wing. We're going to create a line. So same colors. This is a softer brush I'm using. And then with the other round brush, just a clean brush, you're going to wet underneath. Actually, this is my round 4. So it's a smaller brush, it's a smaller area. And then you're softening it. So you're creating a shadow so the color bleeds. As far as painting the trees, branches, nothing really changed in this technique that I've been doing for years. So I start by wetting the branch or a tree. I'm using a softer brush for this. I don't really wet it perfectly. I'm okay with if there's some areas that stay paper dry. But the first color is always cobalt blue pretty much. And then you see it's burnt sienna, Van Dyke brown, and indigo. It's kind of the same steps that I've used in my recent classes. And I start with a cobalt blue, and this is like a milk-like ratio. I let that color to bleed too, but you can see like where I wetted, where I didn't wet. And you kind of want to not cover the whole thing with that blue, but just kind of think about it like where you want to apply that blue. Which you will notice when you add that burnt sienna, like it's like how natural it starts to look with those blue undertones. When you start adding the darks, just keep in mind that the ratio between water and paint needs to become more like a heavy cream to cream top, so you have more control. And then if you want to add an additional color, then like right now I'm adding some of the sap green, but you want to use like a cream top like ratio between water and paint, so cream top. And this is also my softer brush. This is the round 8 golden 2. Now once you add all your colors to the branch, there's some things you can still do. For example, you can still grab like this heavy cream-like ratio between water and paint of the same colors, or just Van Dyke Brown and Indigo, and you can go to a like a wetter area section of the branch and pull the paint. As you already have paint on your brush, but you kind of pull it and you can add like tiny little branches, for example. Another thing you can do is use salt. So you can, sprinkle some salt over the branch. So as you notice, I didn't preserve the claws, the toes of the bird. Instead, now I'm lifting. I much prefer today to actually paint the whole tree and just at the end lift the colors for my claws. So I decided here to add a second layer. So with the feathers, I wanted to make the yellow feathers pop even more, make them brighter, more colorful. So I always suggest wetting more than you need, because you never know how far you're going to go with that color application. Maybe you end up adding more browns, shades of brown, and so on. This is imidazolone yellow, and then you see more of that raw sienna blending in there. And staying away from the kind of left side of the bird, because I want to show the chest is highlighted. And then the raw sienna, some of the umber, the same colors I've used before. You can even add Van Dyke Brown. For the toes, it's quite simple, or legs. We wet it first and then apply the quinacridone red, raw sienna, or even imidazolone yellow if you prefer that. And try to focus on applying colors toward like the right side. So I'm staying away from the top or left side, just because it's highlighted. The left side of the leg is highlighted. We're going to do the same thing with the toe. We're going to wet it and then add the same colors. And for the darks to shade it, I am using quinacridone red and cobalt blue. But this time I'm grabbing cream top like ratio between water and paint. Even heavy cream might work, but just feel it out, because you want to add it only like in some areas and toward the right side, because again you want to keep the left side of each leg lighter. These are just final touches, like the painting is pretty much done. So I just had a clean brush and I went through it just to soften it. And then here I decided to make it a little darker, just some parts of that eye. And that's pretty much it. And then here, using my rigger brush size 2, I actually don't have this brush. It was a tester brush. I was working on the rigger brush, but I decided to go with the Songbird line of my brushes. This was going to be part of like the golden 1 and 2, but I decided to go with the other ones. Either way, just a rigger brush to add some final hair detail. When I see that the highlight has some color in it, and in this case it's like a blue violet, so follow blue with some quin red, that's when I know, okay, this is going to have that undertone layer. And so when you look at the highlight, this part is kind of really like white almost, and then you have the blue.